if you are interested in cutting into the pages of your book to create sort of a hole in the book or some sort of hidden pocket like this one has, what you need to do is make sure that your book is thick enough to handle that, right? Or your page chunks are thick enough to handle cutting in a little ways, so digging out half of this chunk, say. If you have a section that's really thin, it might be a little bit harder to work with. You're just gonna have to be a little bit careful, but it can still be done. So this one I think is a fun example because here they cut out sort of a little door, and then they put multiple different collage pages on the inside to create a few funny different faces to go along with the baby. And yeah, that's just really an interesting way that you can go about it. This one is also an interesting thing that they've done here. They've created sort of a game, right? These different pieces, you have to find the ones that match up with each other, okay? But it all is a little pocket that then these pieces hide inside of, and the book closes like normal. So anyway, if you want to cut out a pocket, what I highly recommend is that you use a pencil to draw out first where your hidden pocket will be. So is your hidden pocket going to be just a large rectangle and a giant chunk kind of in the middle? Are you going to cut out a couple of small rectangles? Maybe I'll do one up on this part, and I don't have a ton of space there, but I have something I can work with. And I'll cut out down here as well. So this page will have 2 little cutouts. Now, you're gonna take the time to make your lines straight and make sure that you know, you're being precise with measuring if that's something that's important to you, but I do really, really think that's important to cut or to use pencil to physically draw on the page before you begin cutting. Now, when you're ready to begin cutting, if you have an X-Acto knife at home, that is a great tool. That's what we're using here in school. You can also do this with a box cutter or a utility knife. This is a fairly common household tool. Either way, you're using a razor blade. These are very sharp blades, okay? Now, the part that is going to do the cutting is the part that is angled, and so you'll look at it and you'll notice the blade has a slight angle cut on it. So this is the sharp edge. This is not sharp. This one is not sharp. This is not going to do the cutting for you. It's this edge that's going to do it. Now, when you are using a box cutter or a utility knife or an X-Acto knife, you always want to be sort of pulling the knife toward you, or maybe kind of slightly angled away from you, but you never want to be pulling it completely opposite. Making this sort of motion isn't going to do what you need. It's going to just be really tricky. So you need to be able to move your book around or whatever it is you're cutting so that you can be pulling generally toward your body. Now, you never want to really be angled at your body, because if you slip and you cut yourself, you're going to have big issues there. And that goes for your hands too. You never want to be pulling toward your hand. That's a big no-no. So you need to be able to hold what you're cutting and sort of brace it so it won't move on you, but it should always be off to the side. So that's all I'm gonna do here. Now I'm gonna start by digging into the page, following the pencil lines that I drew, and I'm actually going to cut through that twice just because. Then I'm going to turn the book so I can do that again without, you know, this way I don't have to pull the knife sort of at a weird angle or away from me or toward my hand, right? If I just turn the book, then I can stay safe and have a better grip, not only on the knife, but on the cutting I'm trying to do. So again, I'm just gonna try to dig through that 2 times just to start. But you can do it kind of however it works for you, especially if you've never done this before and you're just trying to kind of get a feel for it. And we're gonna go all the way around the shape that we're trying to cut. And sometimes you have to get a little creative with your hand placement, but you never want to be pulling it toward your hand. cuts with these are very common on the hands, and it's just because people simply aren't paying attention or aren't being careful or aren't making a plan before they start cutting. If you take a moment to sort of figure it out, then you don't have to be doing anything dangerous, right? If you take a moment, you should be just fine. So once you've cut all the way around, you can start lifting these pages out, and it might get a little tricky to lift, but you can use the tip of your knife to kind of go in where you've already cut and sort of dig it out. And then you should be able to lift out 5 or even 10 pages at a time. And hopefully the edges of your book are glued together better than mine, because you can see where this was sort of flaking apart. I should have put a second coat of glue on this before I started cutting. I didn't realize that issue until just now. But then you're just going to do it again and again and again. And eventually you will dig down deeper and deeper and deeper to create a pocket for yourself. Or even, if you want, you could carve all the way through this so you would wind up with a hole. Okay, so. I have dug this out and cut and cut and cut. I've got about 30 or 40 pages here I think I went through. Now I have more room where I could go deeper, and I might choose to do that later on, but for now I'm happy with what I have. I have a nice little pocket that I could hide some little trinkets in here, and the book would close, and you'd never know it was in there unless you opened it up. So as I was going through that process, I did accidentally tear a couple of the top pages. And again, that could have been avoided had I made sure they were glued together better before I started cutting. But I can also just pull those pages out. It's not really a big deal if they get lost. So something else that I'm struggling with a little bit is that here in my cutting process at the corners, it's not being as clean as I want. So I can sort of shake out all the dust, and then I can go back over those areas later on just as touch-ups. So I can just get in here and sort of chisel away at just the corner to kind of remove those stubborn chunks that wouldn't come out when I was going through the process the first time. And you might have that situation anywhere along the side if your cutting wasn't, maybe if the pressure you're putting on the knife wasn't uniform, or if your pages were being a little bit stubborn. It's pretty common to have to go back over things and sort of touch up the cutting, making it a little more precise so it looks better, in the corners especially. Okay, so there you can see that looks better. I still need to work on this one down here too. Now these areas where I ripped a little bit on the corners, I can touch that up by just adding a little bit of extra glue to that. So I would just paint some glue on top of that and then let it dry. I wouldn't close the book at this point, but I can just glue a little bit. That's not a big deal. I could also use a paintbrush and paint the glue around the edges here. And you might find that helpful, especially if you have a lot of this happening where things are starting to lift up, which is more common in larger openings or larger cutouts. So do consider that you could use a paintbrush and just paint some glue along those edges to help it stay together. If you're going to do that, I might recommend taking another heavy book and laying it on top of there to dry so that you can press it flat. If that's the case, you don't want this other book to get stuck to this page, so you might use a little bit of wax paper or parchment paper in between, glue it, and then weight it down, right? But there you go. There's a couple of tips for cutting out your hidden pocket in your book.